collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, farmers are asked to go easy on planting new crops because of a shortage of water.
Unless people realize that water is not a matter of money. I have a lot of money, so I buy water. You can have millions, and if there is no water, there's no water. You cannot drink your millions.
We discuss the choreography of cross-cultural negotiations, an amusing and sad Israeli-Palestinian example.
And what you see right now in the Middle East is an attempt, definitely by the Israelis, to sustain the status quo ante at all costs. And it's not a very successful policy, and I'm not a prophet, but I would venture a guess that it's not going to take us anywhere good.
And the Euro Arabian Women's North Pole expedition is back safe and sound, having reached the top of the world.
And the current was actually in our favour, pushing us northwest. So at least we were still going a little bit north overnight when we were sleeping. And I can tell you, there was always whoops of joy when we knew that we'd travelled even just 1 kilometre overnight, because it's a 1 kilometre that you don't have to do. It's time that you don't have to spend outside in the cold.
Farmers have been urged not to plant new crops, as poor rainfall this winter is likely to mean that there will be less water available for irrigation, particularly compared to other years. It's an ongoing problem in Cyprus, as anyone who's been here for any length of time will know. But we're joined this week by the head of the Water Development Department, Bambos Hagipakos, to explain what is the situation this year.
The fact of life is that for the last 5 years we didn't have adequate rainfall in Cyprus. This inevitably led to the reduction of stored water in our reservoirs, which are used particularly for irrigation purposes. As time goes, and in view of the fact that the storage level goes down, we have to ensure as department, as technocrats, that we have to give this available water to our farmers according to what we really have at the end of the day.
That's because some of it is, of course, shared with domestic users and industry.
Yes, and that is that we don't have, although water supply is to a very large extent relies on desalination, and that's satisfies most of our needs, yet we still need certain quantities from our reservoirs for drinking water, and of course for farms and animals. Therefore, putting our priorities right, as far as we see it, we have to ensure that the available water, provided first that we satisfy the domestic needs and the needs of animals, which they cannot do without water, then we have to prioritize where do we intend to, or we would like for this water to be given.
And I presume that you've also got to take care, since this, as we said, is an ongoing problem, that you can't use up every last drop this year, because if it doesn't rain next winter, you won't have any.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that really concerns us. And according to the scenario that we are preparing as department, which needs to be approved at the end of the day by the Council of Ministers, so what we say doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be approved at the end of the day. We have to work on the scenario that this coming winter it would provide us an average rainfall. And according to our scenarios, that provided we have an average rainfall this coming winter, we are going to ensure that there is enough water for water supply for next year.
It's a pretty fine balance you've got to do. As far as I'm aware, at the moment, the dams and reservoirs, even though we've had rain recently, are less than quarter of their capacity. So how does that translate into how you calculate what cuts to make, particularly when we have tended, despite the warnings over the 20-odd years I've been covering this problem in Cyprus, we still grow water-hungry crops and export them. We might as well just send the water straight abroad, mightn't we?
Okay, that's a matter of policy, and I've got to say that it's not to the competencies of the Water Development Department to challenge or say anything about that.
But there's something that should be addressed, surely.
It's something that should be addressed, but I think it would be more appropriate if you had some discussions with the Department of Agriculture, who are more related to the subject. I don't know enough about. I'm an engineer. I'm not an agriculturalist. What I know is.
We haven't got the water that they want for the crops they're growing.
Yes, exactly. So that's how far we can go as a department. And from there on, we have a very close cooperation with our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture. When we were developing these scenarios for water, it was in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture and our colleagues who are the first line talking to the farmers. And so the decisions or the suggestions to the government basically are mutual between the technocrats.
All right, you're an engineer, as you said. Is it feasible for the farmers, which I think they have done, to ask for us to have more desalination plants to provide them with water? Isn't that a very expensive and indeed damaging to the environment option?
I'm an engineer, and by profession it means that there's nothing which is impossible to start with. The question is, how much do you pay for that impossibility? And when we know that desalinated water costs 85, 90 cents per ton, as compared to 5, 6, 10, something like that it is from the reservoirs, then the question is, who is paying for this water? And if you start growing crops with water that it's 90 cents per ton, how much are you going to sell them for? Because we cannot subsidize agriculture in that sense. So if we provide them with desalinated water, then inevitably the prices of crops would go
sky high.
Sky high. So you might as well not have them. So it is a very fine balance, there's no doubt about it, but I don't know of any place that desalinated water, with its current costs, technology may change over time, we don't know that, apart from probably Dubai, that they can afford the money, that desalinated water is actually used for irrigation. Our principle, however, is to maximize the available use of water, including the recycled water from our wastewater treatment plants, which we use almost all of it, basically, both in Larnaca and Limassol. Not exactly all of it, because we have to do some more infrastructure works, but it's there. And all of it we use in Paphos area. So that's one of the things that we paid a lot of attention in the last few years.
Now, as far as I'm aware, when you do use recycled water, where do you store it before it's pumped in to the southern conveyor and the other pipelines that go to the farmers? Because a lot of them certainly used to be, and I think still are, stored above ground, which means the amount of evaporation during our hot summers must be huge.
Basically, what is two instances we have. In Larnaca area, it's stored above ground in reservoirs that have been built since the wastewater treatment plant was built years ago. And now we're in the process of building a new reservoir for the extension of the Larnaca area wastewater facility.
Above ground? Or
it's above ground.
Wouldn't it make sense somehow to reduce the evaporation?
Yes, it's all technical, the subject. If we go to Limassol now and Paphos area, we store it underground because there is place to store it underground. It's the aquifers of the rivers that can be used as storage. But in Larnaca area, there isn't such a technical, basically, facility to store it underground. You have to store it underground where there is space, if we can call it space, where there's an aquifer, where there is the soil conditions are such that you can actually store it.
Okay, let's come to domestic use, because you, I'm sure, remember, I certainly do, the years when we only got mains water for a couple of hours in the middle of the night 3 times a week. And people did then, to some degree, conserve water.
Yeah.
We have, since we introduced desalination and that problem has disappeared, not seemed to have grasped the fact that water is still well, liquid gold here in Cyprus, and you still see people, although it's illegal, hosing pavements, hosing verandas, literally wasting one of our most precious resources. What do we do about that? Because I know you did call as well on domestic users to cut down their usage.
Yes, now we've got to be practical. All of these things, I mean, hosing pavements, verandas, it's illegal. And there is the law is there that you can actually impose penalties.
And has anybody ever had a penalty imposed?
Probably very few, I guess, or very, very few actually. The problem, which it is my point of view, that is not a matter of, because it's so widespread, the issue, you cannot drive from neighborhood to neighborhood hoping that you'll find somebody who's hosing the pavement. Unless people realize that water is not a matter of money. I have a lot of money, so I buy water. You can have millions, and if there is no water, there's no water, and you cannot drink your millions. So it's for people to realize that water is valuable. That's the first thing. The second thing, which is my personal opinion, is that people can realize two ways. One, by being trained or changing their culture. The other is changing the effect on their pocket. And if you buy the water for 30 cents or 50 cents and €1 as it scales up, after a certain level, if you start paying 20 euros a ton, then you start thinking about it. At this point in time, people can get away with this service of water very, very cheaply.
So we should put the price up for a start?
If you ask me, that's my personal opinion, I don't know if you can, but the price is certainly a way of putting pressure. And I'm not saying that you have to put price for penalizing people and for them not to have a shower. We're talking about the excess of water that certain people are doing. You want to have a swimming pool? Fine, have a swimming pool, but you don't pay the water for 30, 50 cents, you pay for 50 euros. And you have second thoughts if you want to have a swimming pool or go to the local pool. So financial, fiscal measures definitely can affect. Okay, it's not easy. Social is not easy. I know what that means if you go around saying that. But it's something that we have, at some stage as a society, deal with it. It has a price, and we have to put against it the right price.
Absolutely. Well, you've been warned, and if you're a farmer, you will already know that there is a chance that the amount of water available for irrigation this year will be less. So it does pay, and I do remember at least 20 years ago talking to somebody from an agricultural sector who said, why do you export all these water-hungry crops? Why don't you change what you grow, and then you'd save water and you'd still make the money from the exports? It's worth thinking about. If you're a domestic user, well, it's very easy to cut down. I'm sure you know how, and hopefully all our schools are teaching the youngsters just what they need to do to make sure they use as little water as possible. We've been talking to the head of the Water Development Department, Bambos Hagipakos. Earlier this week, the Department of Politics and Governance of the University of Nicosia, in cooperation with the Diplomatic Academy and the Cyprus Centre for European and International Affairs at the university, held a research seminar. It was entitled The Choreography of Cross-Cultural Negotiations, an amusing and sad Israeli-Palestinian example. It was given by Dr. Doran Pelly from the University of Southern California, and he joins us now. So can you just outline for us what you were talking about?
Well, basically, negotiations are a human event. Human events are choreographed. We enact rituals. That's what we do. We're a storytelling species, and we tell stories, and we tell them in a choreographed way. And what I basically did is I took a minute and a half of video demonstrating the collapse of the peace talks between Israel and Palestine, and showed how it collapsed due to incorrect choreography.
Who does the choreographing?
Well, ideally, there will be someone who understands what is actually going to happen and what is happening and what is likely to happen.
So the negotiation process has to be, in a sense,
you need a stage manager.
Pushed along by somebody who's not actually taking part in the negotiations.
Well, there are a million flavors of negotiations, but the specific video that I chose demonstrates a minute and a half, as I said, in the life of ex-President Bill Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and Ehud Barak. These were the main protagonists in this particular ritual, and President Clinton was leading Prime Minister Barak and President Arafat into a negotiations hall, and something took place at the entrance to the hall that basically resulted in the collapse of the negotiations due to the humiliation of Yasser Arafat. And basically, what I show is a frame-by-frame demonstration of how bad choreography begets disaster.
Do you have an answer of good choreography, or how you could change, if you like, the narrative in a situation like that?
Absolutely. Good choreography is a choreography that understands the actors, the protagonists, and understand the culture of the protagonists. And if they come from different cultures, you need to create something in between that will enable both of them to play their roles without stepping on anybody else's feet.
And without losing face.
And without losing face.
Because that's a very important part
in the
of
Middle East, you call it losing honor. In the Near East, it's losing face. In the Middle East, it's losing honor. And this is exactly what it's all about. Yasser Arafat, who is the victim in this particular ritual, was supposed to allow Ehud Barak go ahead of him into the conference hall, but Ehud Barak, who did not understand the game, the ritual, the very serious game, basically strong-armed Arafat into the hall ahead of him, humiliating him to no end. In addition to that, had Ehud Barak allowed Yasser Arafat to push him in, he would have given Yasser Arafat the opportunity to restore some of his damaged sense of honor by giving Arafat the opportunity to show magnanimity and enable Ehud Barak to go ahead of him. By strong-arming and forcing Arafat ahead of him, Barak showed everybody who's the boss, except that was at the cost of the negotiations. Of course, this was only one part in the story of the collapse of the peace talks, but the fact is, and research demonstrates that extremely well, both empirically and otherwise, if you do not deal with the honor needs of a Muslim Arab side in a dispute, you are not going to move forward to deal with substantive issues.
So since then, we seem to be going down a never-ending path towards nothing. What's your take on the current situation in the Middle East and the stalled negotiations, and indeed what's happening on the border of Gaza in the last few weeks?
Well, unfortunately, it demonstrates a variety of human traits. One is the desire to sustain the status quo ante. We are, most of the time, under not very successful leadership. We are afraid of making any changes to the status quo. Better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And even though it has been proven numerous times that the only way you can actually win is if you take your chances, and you may fail several times on the road to success, but unless you are willing to take the chances and gamble on failure and success, you will never reach success. And what you see right now in the Middle East is an attempt, definitely by the Israelis, to sustain the status quo ante at all cost. And it's not a very successful policy, and I'm not a prophet, but I would venture a guess that it's not going to take us anywhere good.
Do you have an answer or a suggestion for how things could change? I mean, does it need a change of leadership on both sides, perhaps? And then we have the thorny question of the US moving its embassy to Jerusalem and the problems that has caused, particularly for the Palestinians.
Well, the situation is definitely complex. You touched on a couple of thorny points. There's probably a couple of dozen once you start stripping it and looking at it. The first thing that is necessary is a desire to actually make peace, to move towards peace, not to talk about peace, not to sing about peace, not to dream about peace, not to yearn about peace, not to do any of those things, but to actually make a decision that you move towards peace, and you know that there are going to be setbacks, and you know that it's going to be a difficult and painful road, but you should understand as a leader that this is where you want to take your constituency.
But you first have to understand yourself that that is where you want to go, and that seems to be missing.
Well, it's been missing for a long time. The politics both on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side are not the politics of hope, are not the politics of compromise, are not the politics of optimistic perspective. They're the politics of zero-sum game, they're the politics of power, they're the politics of violence. Even when there's no violence, there's violence. It is essentially a form of violent negotiations with or without the casualties. And it's destined to go nowhere because, and it's very important to understand, both sides want things to go nowhere because they're unwilling to play on the field of possibilities. They want to play on the field of their dreams, on the field of their constituencies' dreams, and these are fields that will lead only to nightmares, not to better future.
As you say what you've just said, I can't help thinking of the situation here in Cyprus, because it seems to me it's a mirror image of what you've just explained.
Well, it shares many aspects, and I would definitely urge people definitely on the Greek Cypriot side to learn very well how Muslims and Arabs negotiate and what it is that they want, need, and will never compromise on the road to even the beginning of meaningful negotiations. And in that sense, I think that reasonably little knowledge around, and I may venture to say that once they start thinking about it, looking into it, asking those questions, getting answers that may even lead to some new ideas and some new formulae that will hopefully put some optimism into the process. Right now, it's a convenient, painless, comfortable sustaining of the status quo ante. And I've been to the borders. It's not a pleasant neighborhood. And I'm sure that both sides would like to change it. And I hope that they do.
And that is Dr. Doran Pelly from the University of Southern California, who was in town earlier this week giving a research seminar on the choreography of cross-cultural negotiations, and particularly an amusing and sad Israeli-Palestinian example. But perhaps here in Cyprus we could take note of that one as well. You perhaps recall that a couple of weeks ago we spoke to the Cypriot team member of the Euro Arabian North Pole expedition. That was just as they were heading out to the ice to ski that last degree to the North Pole. She is Stephanie Solomonides, and she's back gratefully on terra firma, having completed the mission. Stephanie, welcome back to the Cyprus News Digest. Now tell us all about the trip. It happened so quickly really this time, when I think that when you were doing Antarctica it took, nearly a month, didn't it?
It is great to be back on firm land. You are absolutely right. This one was so much shorter in comparison to the South Pole. The South Pole was 38 days, and we were actually on the continent for 56 days. So a much different experience. Nonetheless, this one was still a very unique experience again. It did go by really, really quickly. I think by the time, I think we all got into it, we were already on day 5 and almost at the end. So I'm sure all my teammates will probably say that it was hard enough as it was. So maybe having another 10 days of it would have been a little bit of a stretch.
So do tell us whether it all went smoothly. You did talk last time we spoke about the dangers of the sea ice moving and pushing you backwards and having to retrace your steps. Did any of that happen, or did it actually pan out perfectly and you just kept heading to the pole?
So I wouldn't say it was completely perfect, but some of our fears happened, and some of what we feared didn't happen. So I guess it was a bit of a balance of both. It's always a degree of luck. So with the sea currents, you can never know. The guys at Borneo Ice Station who do the logistics for this North Pole expedition and for other various expeditions, they set out their scientists. They know where the drift is preferable, so whereabouts to drop off the teams to have a bit of an advantage. So we were very lucky that our drop-off point was in a favourable position, and the current was actually in our favour, pushing us northwest. So at least we were still going a little bit north overnight when we were sleeping. And I can tell you, there was always whoops of joy when we knew that we'd travelled even just 1 kilometre overnight, because it's a 1 kilometre that you don't have to do, and it's time that you don't have to spend outside in the cold. So from that aspect, we were very lucky. We were also very lucky that despite having to break up our night sleep every 1.5 hours to do polar bear watch, we didn't see any polar bears, so that was also a good thing. However, last time we also discussed frostbite.
Mariam had to leave, didn't she?
Yeah, so unfortunately that happened. So, it's such a harsh environment. It's very, very, very easy to get a finger injury, especially a finger injury. And unfortunately, Mariam from Saudi Arabia on the first day, just 4 fingers frostbite. And to be honest, it could have easily been me, because on that day, we were both having major hand issues. Mine were not reacting as I expected them to. Nothing like they reacted or how they coped in Antarctica. So I really, really struggled. If I'm brutally honest, I was fearful that by the end of the day, I might have some sort of injury. It was very harsh. We set off in minus 38 at Borneo. It was then minus 34 when we were skiing. And it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. We'd had a long day, long flight. So my heart really goes out to my teammate. It's just one of those things that it's also, again, a degree of luck a little bit on being able to call it out at the right time just before something happens.
Well, but the good thing is that she did actually join you at the pole, didn't she, at the end? I think she flew out with Mr. Kaspersky.
Yeah, that was fantastic. That was just such a lovely surprise, because she made it to the pole. She made it onto the expedition. She was there for the first day and night, and it was such a wonderful surprise. Dean Kaspersky came down, which was amazing to get our main sponsor to come and greet us at the North Pole, which was brilliant. And then hiding behind him was little Miriam. And it was just so joyous. I mean, none of us expected it. It was so great to see her and see that she was in great spirits. And she's just that type of person. She's just such a positive, unique human being. Always glass half full type of person. So definitely a bigger person, a greater person than I am. So I was so happy that she was able to at least achieve coming to the North Pole in that manner as well.
Now, since you've got back, and I suppose you were all jolly glad you didn't have to ski back, I presume you did get airlifted back, but since you've got back, you've all been undergoing medical checks. Tell us a bit about the science behind the expedition. I think it was partly to do with what effect those sort of temperatures and conditions have on the human body.
The science aspect of this expedition has been really interesting. And it's obviously something I've never partaken before. So it's been driven by the fact that there's very little data, especially on women, in extreme environments. So it's driven by a doctor called Audrey, who I think is based at Colorado University. And she specialises in sort of nutrition, metabolism, but the scientific side of it, as opposed to the nutrition side of it. And she has driven this project from start to finish. And prior to going out, we've taken blood tests, we've been doing various tests like VO2 tests, which measure, your lung capacity, your blood, what your metabolism is. And the whole point of all of this is to see the effects of an expedition, of being in such an extreme environment, what your state was before, what your state was during the expedition. So we were providing saliva samples throughout the days on the ice. And now, once again, we're doing a full-blown medical on our return so that all the data can be compared. And I think the basis of this is, I think Audrey wants to show the effect of exercise on metabolic rate, on fat levels and muscle levels. And my understanding is that all this data, because it's brand new, can be used for all future expeditions for streamlining, the kind of food that a new expedition may take, how many calories another expedition may eat. I also know she's done work with ESA, the Space Agency program, with astronauts. So it's really, really cool to be working with an individual like this who has this sort of experience and this interest in extreme environments and how it affects the body.
I imagine that you also had a lot of this down before you left to know what provisions to take with you to keep you going.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Felicity is got all this experience on expeditions, so there is a rough guide on what is the body calorie consumption, let's say, for expeditions. Most expeditions take the same sort of food. There are only a few companies in the world that create foods that are high enough in calorie, fat content, carb content, protein content, can be taken to the polar environments. So roughly everyone uses the same method. So this is hopefully going to provide it in a more streamlined manner and probably see how effective the current movement of how expeditions feed themselves and fuel themselves when they're out there, and maybe bring on a change.
So tell us where people can go and have a look at the photographs, can follow what you did, and I guess you're heading back to where? The UK shortly?
Yes, I'm back. I'm going straight back to London as soon as we're finished from Longyearbyen with our medicals, sorting out all the kit, uploading all our photos, and that's kind of the end of the immediate journey, really. But we've all finally now reconvened in Longyearbyen and we're trying to compile all our photos and find the best ones, and we're getting round to finally updating our Instagram, our Twitter, our Facebook pages. Our handle is really easy for people to remember. It's at North Pole 2018. There's definitely some very cool photos coming up. I've just seen them. They've been filtering through, so there'll be a lot of content over the next few days, I believe.
But no photos with polar bears. I wonder if that's a good thing, or you'd rather like to have seen one.
I'm very happy we haven't seen polar bear. I don't think they are as cuddly and as cute as we all think they are when we watch documentaries. So I think it's been safe to say we've all been very happy that we haven't had that as another danger to consider.
And what about the future, Stephanie? Is Felicity planning any more expeditions? I can't believe she's not. And will you be involved?
Knowing Felicity, I'm sure she has about 1,000 ideas already running in her mind and at various stages of preparation and implementation. Whether I will be involved or not, I don't know. I really couldn't say. I don't know what my future holds anymore. I'm super proud and happy to have achieved the amazing honour of becoming the only person in Cyprus to ski to both poles, which is incredible. There are very few people in the world who do both poles, to be honest, in the first place. So for me, I think, well, maybe it's a conversation for again in another 9 years' time.
That's a very diplomatic reply from Stephanie Solomonides, one of the team of women who achieved their goal to ski the last degree to the North Pole. They did it. Our congratulations to the Euro Arabian Women's North Pole Expedition. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.